Greetings and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board, fourth session with Dr. Darryl Tonemah on coping with stress during COVID-19. And well, coping with stress, finding our healing informed way of addressing feeling overwhelmed. And I'm very happy to be able to again introduce our speaker, our presenter, Dr. Darryl Tonemah. Take it away, Darryl.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This we're kind of building our house here. This is our fourth session. But if there's new folks, just a quick introduction again. My name is Darryl Tonemah. I am Kiow, Comanche, and Tuscarora, and I live here in Western New York. The Tuscarora are one of the Haudenosaunee nations, and we're the furthest one west, just outside Niagara Falls. I'm a psychologist, and I do a lot of work. I specialize in trauma and how it affects the brain and the body, and and I try to focus much more on healing than dealing. And so over the course of our sessions together, first we started out with just some simple things we can do to make sure we are well during COVID. And then we just dove in to what is going on with trauma. What does it look like? How does it present? Where is it in the body? Those kind of things. And we're just going to keep diving and diving and diving until we run out of time. Until you kick me out of here, Annie. I'm just going to keep getting after it. So I focus a lot on the young brain because it grows and develops. If it doesn't find safety, if there's not markers met for that brain, it presents in certain ways even into adulthood. When there's not safety, when there's not nutrition, when there's not nurturing, the brain just becomes stressed. And into adulthood, it can look like a lot of different maladies, a lot of things that are addictions and health problems and things like that. So today I kind of want to dive a little more into that, and we'll just go as far as we go. That's kind of my rule when I'm presenting, is we'll get as far as we get, because maybe that's just how Creator got the whole thing planned out, and I kind of like that. So today we're going to talk about that little brain. Remember last time we ended with the second lap around the brain? We did the first time we kind of remembered that the brain is how we're put together. It's electrical. Do you remember that? And then we talked about the different parts of the brain. And so that was the first lap. And the second lap was when we introduced trauma, an event, or a season like COVID season, where there's high stress ongoing, and actually change how these two things, this electrical charge, locates in the brain and actually can change brain structures. Then once we start understanding it at that level, then we can see, well, what can we do to help the spirit and the soul and even the physical parts, the brain, kind of start working for us to heal, not just deal, but to heal. So, and I always start out with the young ones. I don't want us to think it's just it just happens in young ones. We can be traumatized at any given point in our lives. It's just that the young brain is so new and fresh. And remember from last time, it's only 17% done developing when we're born. And so it's going to learn how the world is socially. It's going to learn how the world is in the living room, in the car, if there's safety, if there's security, if there's stability, if there's sobriety. All these markers are met, the brain's going to thrive. And it can prepare for good things. If these markers aren't met, that stress part of the brain crackles more, and maybe they start looking for ways to self-mediate that. And maybe that's creating chaos, creating fights. And so in school, it looks like learning problems or ADHD, things like that. And so there's things that contribute to that. The early life stress, there's too frequent. There's just all sorts of stress all the time. There's no break. And if there's no opportunity for that little brain of the child to go, dude, and just kind of chill for a while. It doesn't have that opportunity. It's too chronic. So there are breaks, but then they get that breath and you got to dive right back into the deep end. So divorce, death of a loved one, separation, alcoholism in the home. So there's just one thing after another, and then too much. So we can handle certain levels of stress, and there's a lot of factors go into how much stress we can handle as adults. How was early life stuff? How was home? How was pregnancy? How was nutrition? Was there stability? That can make us stress hardy, make us stress tougher as we age. But if there's a lot of these things are not being met young, we can actually become stress prone. So I have, remember my brain here? Right here, this limbic system. I was working with somebody just the other day. Might have been since last time I saw you. And there was a lot going on in the house, and she came in. I see a few people here in my office, and she came in and said, "I'm just so stressed. I just want to cry." And she came down and started crying. She said, "Everything just stresses me out." And what it was a limbic. It was this part of the brain, the stress part of the brain, for her, based on her history. She had some abuses when she was young, and so based on her history, that part of the brain is kind of hypersensitive, hypervigilant. So it's looking for things to become more stressed. And it's not a conscious activity. It's not something we choose to do. But her brain has had so much stress that it's really sensitive to any stressors in the environment. And she started to feel overwhelmed. Because that part of her brain was just kind of crackling too much. What we want to do is not run away from that sensation base, the feeling of the overwhelm. We want to lean into that and show her that she doesn't have to be victim to that she can be sovereign in this moment. But she gains her sovereignty, not from avoiding it, not from me saying, well, let's think about something else. Let's think about butterflies and rainbows and puffy clouds. Let's lean into it a little bit and have the body learn something different. And so I asked her, where is it and what does it feel like? And if you remember, our trauma work is the where and the what, not so much the why. We know the why. She knows the why. She knew the why, but she was still overwhelmed. So it wasn't in the why. It was in the where and the what. And she said, I can feel it like a rock right here in her solar. She pointed right to her solar plexus, like a rock right here. I said, well, let's just get to know that a little bit. Let's just say that's the body just giving us information. That's the body just giving us information. And up until this point, she's in her 50s. Up until this point, every time she got that information, she just thought it was overwhelmed, and she was using alcohol to address that sense of overwhelm. She didn't recognize that she had internal tools. She didn't recognize that she could punch it in the nose and it wasn't in charge of her. Because what she did was she has this sense of overwhelm that is stored right here, and she called it alcoholism. She said, that's my alcoholism. But what she was doing was it became fired and wired together so intimately that this sense of overwhelm fired and wired so intimately with, this is the tool that I used to address it. She actually started calling this alcoholism. But those are two different things. The alcohol was the tool she used to address this. They are two different things. So what we work on is, well, let's start getting rid of this thing so you don't need this external tool anymore. And that started at a very early age. She had some traumas when she was young, and it were just too much. And so the brain changed, and she grew up thinking, I don't have the things inside of me to address this. So she started using external things. Let's keep diving into this. This fascinates me. Maybe not you, but me. And so what she was looking for, what all of us are looking for, when Creator put us on this little earth and gave you as a gift to your parents, gave my 3 little chocolate kids sitting at home as a gift to me. What they're looking for is, am I being touched? Am I being fed? Am I being held? Who is safe? Who is consistent? Who is solid? Who is sober? And they're looking around to see if these things exist. And because remember, the brain's only 17% done developing. So it's looking around to say who and what and where and why and how. And if those things aren't being met, if there's chaos, if that child is left cold, and you think, well, they were only cold for 10 minutes. You and I understand 10 minutes because we're adults. And we have adult brains. We understand 10 minutes. But that child doesn't understand 10 minutes. That infant, it just knows that I'm cold and this is, the world is chaotic and this is how it's going to be. Same with hungry or hot or not being held or having inconsistency. That's stressful to the little brain. And you can't use adult logic on the little brain because they're not the same. And so it's trying to figure out how the world is going. And so part of what we do is, and this is a hard word, is we nurture, is we bring along. We bring along in good ways that who it's not so much what I'm saying to my 3 chocolate kids sitting at home, but it's more who I am being in their lives. Who I am being in their lives. And that's the role of my role is to create a solid, consistent, sober presence in their lives. So their brain has an opportunity to thrive and not try, then it doesn't have to figure out, am I going to eat today? Am I going to live today? Am I going to get beat today? That thing's off the table for them. They know they're going to have all those things met. And that's a big deal to the little brain because it starts thriving. That's what we want for our kids in our communities. Let's keep going. So I said it earlier, what fires together, wires together. So just using this patient that I was talking about earlier, this knot in her stomach, she used alcohol as a tool to address it. Pretty soon she started calling that her alcoholism. The knot in her stomach, it fired together and it wired together. An event and a sense of overwhelm kind of wired together. And as I shared before, trauma's a jerk, man. It's not our buddy. And what it does, it's, like I said before, it separates when it should integrate and integrates when it should separate. Do you remember me saying that? So it integrates what fires and wires. It integrates this sense of overwhelm with this sense of addiction. And it separates the mind from the body. So what fires together, wires together, and it starts sculpting the brain for the purposes of survival. So certain parts of the brain grow or swell for the purposes of survival, and other things shrink for the purposes of survival. And as we dive in a little bit more, I want you to remember that the phrase, if we could have thought our way out of it, we would have by now. That's going to be key to the healing stuff that we do. Is let's quit using that logic part of the brain. That'll come in later. We'll use that later like crazy. Awesome. We're going to rock it. But if that's our first tool, when we're in overwhelm, or when people we work with are in overwhelm, we're throwing a pea at a brick wall. It's not going to be effective. So for us to start moving the needle, the tool has to meet the event. So we did horse lips last time. We did horse lips last time, didn't we, Annie, with this group? Where we did that. And another method is called tongue talk, just for the fun of it. Tongue talk is where you take your tongue here. Well, let me pause here for a second. The tools we're going to use aren't, let me ask the $1 million question tools. The tools we're going to use are, let's get the brain working on our behalf for us. And so there's one called tongue talk. And I want you to try this with me. Is take your tongue and find your teeth. Not in the jar next to your bed. Find the teeth in your mouth and that ridge right behind your teeth, right there. Push up on it with your tongue. Now let's sing happy birthday, right? Happy birthday. Man, I wish I could hear. Happy birthday. Okay, what are we doing there? There's that ridge.
I really think that we should do that again and just have everybody unmute and do that.
Can we do that?
Yes.
All right, let's try it.
They don't have to put their videos on, but unmute, folks. Come on. Join in.
Are you ready?
All right, I'll do it with
Press
you.
against the roof of your mouth with your tongue, right behind your teeth. Happy
birthday
to
to
you.
you.
Happy
Happy
birthday
birthday
to
to
you. Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday,
I'll sing you up.
baby. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, everybody.
Someday we'll do this in a room together, and that'll be awesome. But for whatever reason, remember last week we did the horse lips, which loosens the facial muscles. This actually loosens a band in the back of the neck, and the vibration helped with a sense of calm. You think about monkin chanting and calming, like that. That's actually, it creates a sense of calm. Now, try with your honey, whenever you guys get in an argument, to say, honey, let's argue in tongue talk. And I bet you'll get over your argument in about 5 seconds, because nobody likes to be called, are you good, Gilly? When you're talking like this. Give it a shot. This is good for your marriage. Okay. Let's keep going. Time goes by so fast with you guys. Okay. So let's dive into why we do these things that affect brain stuff. So since the early 1900s, the brain imaging tools started showing what's happening during the brain during trauma, that it affects the sensation base, the sensation centers of the brain, and then we label those things. It results in, the trauma is a asynchronous moment. We've talked about this before, where asynchrony, where things are out of whack, where our lives should have a certain flow to it. Trauma adds this out of whackness, and the brain doesn't know what to do with this out of whack. It's not sure where to file it. This electrical charge that's just out of whack. So it files it, it stores it as this charge, and then it just takes laps. You remember we get the information from the body. Well, let's dive into that for a second. I'm going to put this in here because I want to make sure that okay. So let's dive into this just for a second. It's been found, and the research supports, that we get our information from the body, and then we label it. It's not the other way around, that we have this and then we label it. So what happens is we label it based on context. So you guys were just singing happy birthday with your tongue against the roof of your mouth, and I was giggly, and Annie was giggly about it, and it felt good, right? So how did I know it felt good? How did I know that was happy and not something else? Because my heart was beating a little bit faster. My breathing was probably a little bit shallow, right? I was probably a little bit tingly. And those are the same sensations as when you're angry. Your heart beats a little bit faster or a lot faster. Your breathing's more shallow, maybe you're a little bit tingly. It's the same sensation base. It's the same as when you're excited. Is your heart's beating fast? You're at a football game or the basketball game, Todd County Middle School, and they win, your body's excited, and you label it as excitement. You don't label it anger. So how does that happen? And so researchers looked all this stuff and did all this stuff and hooked people up and everything, and found that this body information happens first, and then we label it. So we just label that fun or happy, right? But what trauma does is it mislabels. The labels get all jacked up. Because remember I just said, when I'm happy, when you're excited, your heart's beating fast, you're breathing a little more shallow, you're tingly, and it's the same thing as anger. So look at your schools, and how many fights happen in gym class? How many fights happen getting off the bus between classes? Because their body, they're particularly a gym class, their heart's beating faster, they're hot, they're sweaty, and that's the same sensation base that was labeled, that was fired and wired with dad hitting mom, or getting hit by dad, or the abuses. any list of the abuses. So we get the sensation based, and it mislabels and says something's going on here that we need to survive. Not that we need to enjoy or that we need to be excited about or anything like that, that we need to survive. And so we help them label that. And so some of the cognitive work, once we start recognizing that this information is confusing to a lot of us. Think about when your fights escalate with your honeys or your kids, or when your kids escalate, when they start to get jacked up, when they start to get louder, things like that. Think about what is occurring previous to that. And when you're getting in that fight with your honey, feel what changes in you. I know when Carminda and I start getting all squanky with each other, I feel it in my chest. And usually my chest is saying, of course you're right, she's wrong. That's what my chest is saying, but it's probably wrong. But it goes like this, and I can feel it. The sensation change. Now, put that in the context of the person that was sitting in my office a couple of days ago. She get that sensation base, but rather than react to it, which usually doesn't end well. It ends well with fighting or drinking or using or any list of bad things that are going to move the needle for us. So rather than reacting to it, what if we learned to hang with it for a second? It doesn't have to be our best friend, but leaning into that discomfort just a little bit. I'm going to say it again, that sounded smart. What if we leaned into that discomfort just a little bit so our body learns a different response? Because every time we just go with it, that gets fired and wired, and that groove deepens, gets stronger, and so that becomes the default. That becomes what it goes to when this thing happens. Here's the information. We send it up through the thalamus, and the information says, I know what this is. This is fight. This is go time. But what if we waited and let the body adjust and breathe it down? Remember, we talked in the very first session about flute breathing. And do nothing for a second. So when we're doing that, remember the sympathetic system, the part of our body that gets us excited, and the parasympathetic system, the part of our body that calms us down, the part of our brain that calms us down. And you've noticed that when you exhaled, the parasympathetic kicked in, and it's a different tempo for everyone. You may have to do that breath 12 times. This is just a different tempo for everyone. But that kicks in, that acetylcholine is released to the heart rate, and the game slows down. And it's in that moment where we create a response instead of a reaction. And remember, trauma becomes a lifestyle of hypervigilance and reaction. So one of the things that we can do in the healing process is helping the body recognize that moment, and then fires and wires differently. That labeling moment. Okay, let's keep going. So until we figure that out, we're kind of perpetually trying to mediate. We're trying to figure out on our own. We're trying to, and what it can look like then is sabotage ourselves because there's some shame associated with the event or the lifestyle or the things that caused this trauma. There's levels of shame. And so we struggle with our own wellness or success or victories. One of the things that when folks come in, one of the first things we do after you put our feet hard on the floor is we talk about victories. And a victory may be, I was sober today. A victory may be, I talked to this person where I normally wouldn't have done that. I smiled today. Sometimes you got to claim your victories because there is such a, I hate to say shame spiral, but I'll say there's a lot of shame associated with it, with the traumas, and starting to say, I did this. And one of the things that I'll tell folks is, you're here, man. You made it to 50 years old. You did it. Now we want to tell those parts of the body that are reacting in this way, thanks for your service, but I'm ready to go a different direction now. And have it be okay. Have that permission be okay. And if you're thinking about yourself, or if you're thinking about somebody in your family, here's a big question to ask is, do you want to be different? And your knee jerk or their knee jerk, well, of course I want to be. But wait a minute. They've been this way for a long time. And people understand them and they understand themselves socially in this way. So how, in a real way, how does healing look for you? And how does it feel for you? Because it changes social reactions. It changes you and it changes those around you. And it's more than just, it can't be just a knee jerk because it's a commitment. So as you're having these conversations, that's a question. Do you really want to change? And say, if things worked out the way you wanted to work out, how would things be different for you? And what would the hard things about it be? Have a real conversation about that stuff. Because up to this point, this level of chaos and stress looks like sabotage, screaming, hitting, using, stirring the pot in the community or in the workplace, smoking, all this stuff. And usually these things that they're doing are to mediate, to try to use external things to try to make myself feel better in this moment. Really, that's what we want, is to feel like I'm going to survive this moment. Sometimes it may not even be about feeling better. Sometimes I just want to survive this moment. And I'm sitting here white knuckling it. And if everyone can see me white knuckling it, what if I can create chaos over there so nobody's looking at me anymore? Because a lot of folks that I work with feel like they can see, other folks can see the shame within them. So let's talk about ACE stuff. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about it, but I always like to touch on it because I think it was very important work, and I think it helps us understand ourselves and our communities better and our homes better. So the ACE study is probably, geez Louise, 20 years ago already, in that range. Adverse childhood experiences. So things that happened before we were 18 years old. And there's this big study, and they had people write, there was like a 10-question questionnaire. Was there alcohol in the home? Was there drug abuse in the home? Was there incarceration in the home? Divorce, mental illness? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then there was this health questionnaire. Do you have STDs? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you have diabetes? Are you obese? Are you overweight? Do you have any cancers? Things like this. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, 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 no. And it wasn't causal. They didn't say this led to this and that's the way you're going to be. But they found that the higher this number was, the more things that we said yes to, the more things that we had on this side. So at a score of about 4, dad's an alcoholic, mom's an alcoholic, there's abuse in the home and dad's in prison. That's a 4. And they found that at about a 4 or more, there's up to a 12 times greater risk. Listen to this now. Up to a 12 times greater risk for alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide attempt. At a score of 4 or more, there's up to a 4 times greater risk for smoking, teen pregnancies, STDs, multiple sexual partners, and at a 4 or more, up to 1.5 times greater risk for severe obesity. So if you look at that list, drinking, drugs, with the exception of depression, suicide attempts, smoking, sex, eating. With the exception of depression, every one of those is an external tool for an internal event. I'll say that again. drinking, drugs, suicide attempt, smoking, sex, and eating. All of those are external tools trying to get a fix, trying to get an endorphin rush, because we haven't modulated this thing that's inside of us, and many don't believe that they have those tools to do that. And here's, as we keep going over our time together, we're going to find out there are more and more and more and more tools, and we're going to practice those tools. We're going to get to know those tools, but many don't know they have that. And that's one of the things when I'm working with folks, that you are no longer a victim to this. You are not toolless against this sense of overwhelm that you call drug addiction, that you call alcoholism. This sense of overwhelm that they've labeled this thing. I think that's fascinating when that's occurred many times and kind of became a theme, actually. So here's my friend Ann Bullock has this slide. I'm just walking through the slide here. So the bottom, there's a big tree, and at the base of the tree is prenatal or early life nutrition. These are the roots of things. Prenatal early life nutrition, poverty, prenatal substance use or prenatal substance abuse, child abuse or child neglect, quality of early life relationships and learning, epigenetics. We'll probably talk about that next time. So that's the root. And then you climb the tree, and the big branches, the bigger branches are what those things can lead to, which is overeating, emotional responses, remember the limbic system, alcohol use, drug abuse. And the fruit that those big branches bear are addictions, liver disease, HIV, alcoholism, violence, traumatized parenting, teen pregnancies, dropouts, depression, diabetes, obesities, heart disease, cancers, everything we see in our communities. And we have programs, and I'm all for programs, but we pick a fruit, and guess what's going to happen next year? It's going to come right back. We pick it again, it's going to come right back. Every time we pick, it's going to come right back. So, are you ready for a cool phrase? I'm going to give you a cool phrase. You guys can have this tattooed on you somewhere. Just put DT at the bottom of your tattoo. Okay. We're not going to change the fruit till we fix the root. Come on. I'm going to say it again. Come on. We're not going to change the fruit till we fix the root. Creating safety, early life, positive experiences. That's going to reverberate throughout generations in our communities. We just have to turn the model. We got to turn it upside down, because we're having plenty of programs which are great, but we're just going to keep, there's a line feeding those programs perpetually. We're having the same conversations now. I can guarantee it. Think about it. As my dad, I've had with my dad 20 years ago, and he had with his dad, and probably he had with his dad. We're having these same conversations because this is the model that we use. And once we recognize that in our communities, in my home, my first role is to create calm, caring, confident, competent, consistent, sober presence in who I'm being for my children, that reverberates generationally. And sometimes they're not getting that in the home, but if they can get that at the school, if they can get it through a program in the community, somebody solid, consistent, that they know they're going to be there, and that person's solid, that gives that part of the brain the opportunity to breathe for a second. And that reverberates. And that child will grow up and say, you know what saved me? Was that teacher. You know what saved me was that person at the Boys and Girls Club. That presence. Not so much what we're saying, but who we are being in the lives of these children. Then they become adults and they do the same, and so on and so on and so on. So today I'm going to end with the Four Horsemen of trauma. Yeah, that'll be a good spot to end on. So in Levine's work, He doesn't call it the Four Horsemen. I call it the Four Horsemen because it has a good image. The Four Horsemen of trauma, how it presents, doesn't have to be just the one. It can be combinations of these. But hyperarousal, constriction, dissociation, and numbing. Hyperarousal, constriction, dissociation, and numbing. So let's just walk through those. Hyperarousal is the brain perpetually on buzz with hypervigilance, that they can't sit still. Maybe their eyes are darting. They have trouble with sustained attention. They have trouble reading. They have trouble sitting still. They're moving perpetually. In a school, we might call that ADHD. But that's hyperarousal. It doesn't talk about the brain function. It just says, so I bust out my DSM here, my little diagnostic manual when I have a session. They say, well, here's ADHD, and here's what it looks like. Great. But that doesn't talk about cause, what's happening and the cause of it. And I may use a different set of tools for that person. And let's wait to throw pills at that child. Let's see what we can do with it. And I say child, but it goes into adulthood. Person can't sit still. They can't have sustained attention, perpetually moving, and they're hypervigilant. So I had mentioned to you before about hypervigilance. I've thrown that word around a few times. But so our brains are vigilant. Our bodies are vigilant, kind of taking care of itself right now. Remember, we talked about that we're aware of about 40 different inputs, but the survival parts of the brain every second are aware of millions of different inputs. So it's just being vigilant for us, making sure everything's all right. And it's saying, Darryl, I'm going to give you 40 inputs and you just keep talking. And I'll just make sure everything's all good. So, but what happens is the thalamus, the information the body gets, goes here. And instead of sending it to the prefrontal saying, well, everything's all good, the watchtower says everything's all good, it goes to the stress part of the brain. It's like, dude, what? Huh? Dude, like that. So in my body, it feels like this then. That's called hyperarousal. Next one is constriction. And constriction is the tightening of the body, like this, almost like perpetually bracing for impact. And like in a car accident, or like in a sexual abuse or a physical abuse, kind of getting a protection. And these folks have, just like the hyperarousal, you can see that. Constriction, you can see that as well. That's the person that's walking around, the shoulders are up like this, and they don't have any fluidity in their motion. Their body is very rigid. You can see kids walking down the halls like this. In Rosebud, you can see people walking down that main road there like this. And that's because it's winter. In winter, of course, they're going to walk like that. But in the summertime, they're still up like this. They're very tight and rigid when they walk. And these folks talk a lot about stomach problems, headaches, back pain. They may have eczema, skin problems. They're more likely to have asthma. And you could say maybe they're just uncoordinated. That's great. I hope that's what it is. But if we paint everything with that, well, that's just that, they're uncoordinated, maybe we may be doing them a disservice because they're not having any fluidity in their muscles or in their bodies. They'll have a lot of somatic complaints. Remember, somatic is just from the body, getting information from the body. So it doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it from a different location. It probably won't show up on an x-ray, and it's not going to show up in a blood test or anything like that. The headaches, the backaches, stomach problems, it's not going to show up on those tests. But it's somatic. There's information, and usually it has to do with stress or traumas. I'm trying to think what else about these folks. May have low energy. Maybe they're called lazy, because it takes a lot of juice for the body to be perpetually tight like this. Next is dissociation, or depersonalization or derealization. But really the bottom line is the brain just checks out. And it looks like, kind of like some of you look like right now, if I could see you, like that. But dissociation, just like constriction, just like hyperarousal, are all serviceable, necessary tools that the body employs during trauma. Because hyperarousal is there for protection. Constriction is there for protection. Dissociation is there for protection because the sensation part of our brain just kind of unplugs. And it's better to not be in here if I'm getting hit. It's better to not be in here if I'm in a car accident or sexual abuse. It's better to not have this sensation experience. And so the brain checks out. And I work with a lot of folks that dissociation was very necessary in that moment. It was just a way that the brain said, I'm gonna help us survive this, so I'm gonna unplug. And in that moment, it was a great tool for them to survive it, but it's not serviceable in other settings. It's not serviceable in school or at work or while you're driving. So I was working with a boy, he was like 16, and his dad was pretty abusive, like 10 years previous, physical abusive. But he had some of these symptoms, maybe hyperarousal and dissociation. His teacher would say he'd zone out during school. And so I started seeing him, and he was a great kid, social, nice kid. And he walked in, he said, hey, Dr. T, and we started talking, and then he would do this. I promise he did this. And his mouth opened and his eyes dulled, and he looked out the window. And at first, like, he's in the middle of a sentence. And so I kind of looked out the window. I thought, was there a dog fight or something outside, or is there an accident? What am I missing here? And he was gone about 30 seconds. And then he came back, and he didn't know the 30 seconds had passed. And he said, what were we talking about? What was that? And come to find out, his dad was about 6'2", dark hair, dark guy. And I was his trigger. Remember, the amygdala takes snapshots. And if one of the snapshots even kind of matches up, do you remember the phrase? It takes the body back to the same sensations as when the original trauma occurred. So his body says, oh, it's going to happen again. Let's get out of here. So what we had to do sensation work. We had to get him in here and then put his feet hard on the floor. We had to say, what's your body feel like now? Was his heart beating any faster? We had to lean into the information that his body was giving him. And pretty soon we got rid of that because he started to recognize he didn't have to fear that sensation base. It was just part of the perceptual process in this moment. And this moment didn't require fear. It required attention because he was safe to do that. And the last one before our time's up is numbing. So hyperarousal, constriction, dissociation, and numbing. So numbing, when I was reading the research on this, it said psychic numbing. And I thought, I'm not going to do talks and talk about psychic numbing. I don't know what that means. It sounds so fluffy. So I dove into it more. And it talked about the person doesn't know how to feel and doesn't know how others feel, doesn't know how to feel. And I thought, okay, that makes sense, because remember the part of our brain right behind this eye, that's the empathy center. That's where I know how I feel. I can experience how others are feeling. Remember, that shrinks during trauma. So the person didn't know how to feel or didn't know how to experience the feelings of others, which is empathy, which makes, I said, okay, well, that makes sense then. But then it talked about numb locations on the body. And I read this a long time ago, and I thought, that can't be true. And since I couldn't believe it, it must not be true. And what the heck? So I kind of dove into that. And if you remember that this is the sensation center of our brain, not the logic center, the sensation center. And it controls and interprets the sensations that the body gives. You with me there? And so when we start to dive more into what we can do with trauma stuff, we're going to have to learn the language of sensation better than we know it, which we'll practice that in the future. Don't worry about it. So this controls and interprets the sensation stuff. So then it was like, it hit me like a truck that if the sensation is overwhelming, it cuts it off. It numbs it out. Because this is you. That is me. And it knows what I can handle and what I can't handle. And so the information it gets, it says, if I give you this, it's going to be too much. It's going to be too much. Just like the information on memory. The amygdala says, if I give you this information, it's going to be too much. So it holds back information because it's going to be overwhelming for you. And so it just kind of cuts off sensation to different parts of their body. And I started asking that question to folks if they have numb locations on their body. And part of Peter Levine's work is he walks you from toe to head to find out if there are numb locations on your body. And not a lot, I would say a third of the people said, yeah, I actually, and then they'll tell about a numb location. I was doing a talk up in Canada, a community talk. There was some tough stuff that happened up there. And so I went up there and we did some sensation work and having people push their feet hard on the floor, and we'll get to that stuff. And one woman came up to me afterwards. She was in her 40s, and she said, I couldn't do that foot thing that you were telling us to do. And she said, I haven't been able to feel my legs since I was about 12, which is a very specific number. And so I said, what happened at 12? And then she went on to talk about her sexual abuse and things like that. And I said, after empathizing with her and that how hard that must have been, I said, that's not uncommon for people who've been through what you've been through, is that their body goes on survival mode. And she just started bawling. Because if you remember that we suffer in silos and we heal in community. Remember that. We suffer in silos and we heal in community. And she said, the doctors all told me I was crazy. They probably told her it was psychosomatic, but she heard psycho. They told me I was crazy and there was nothing wrong with me because they couldn't find it on an x-ray and they couldn't find it in the blood work or anything like that. But her body bore the burden of the trauma that occurred to her and was trying to protect her. And God bless her, she was 46 years old. She made it. Now I just have to tell the body, thanks for the favor, but I'm ready to do business in a different way now. And so she needed to work on safety and having your body feel safe and leaning into sensation bases and having them not be scary. And that's part of how we start introducing the body to the mind again, is a lot of these sensation bases that the body has had can be kind of scary. And so as long as we are safe in working with them and giving them a safe place to have the experience again, we can start reintegrating some of those things for them. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let's pick up there next week. I wish we could talk all the time.